We all understand the type of climate that we're dealing with. We're dealing with multiple offer situations.
I'd love to know sort of what's your why? What makes you tick? Why are you so successful?
Have a dialogue with your lawyer. Have a dialogue with your agent.
Both sort of passionate about sort of what we do.
Again, vet your agent to make sure that they're experienced and they're local. I like that idea.
No excuse to miss it on Saturdays from 8 to 9.
That's right.
WBZ.
And now, the show that gives you the latest and most relevant housing market news. Real Estate Radio Boston with financial expert Rick Shearer and legal professional Ali Alavi.
Listen, the day that Zillow and Trulia and Realtor.com became such a powerhouse, it was the day that the real estate agent didn't have to provide the data on the properties, which is not a bad thing. It was just, it's what they had access to, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. That's not necessarily what they need to do anymore, but now it's negotiation. It's really making sure that the client is educated through the process. Their roles have shifted a little bit, but I think Stan's going to agree today that the real estate agent is even more important in today's market than ever before.
Right, and we have Mario Pavli and Meri Galstian from Boston Advanced Realty, and they're going to tell us in terms of how they set expectations for their clients and where that education falls in and where the value of the real estate agent is.
Yeah, Mario's going to talk about the fact that there's still multiple offer situations out there and really setting up your client to understand that that's going to happen.
Definitely, yeah. We see real estate agents as playing a very essential role in the marketplace. That I guess as an economist, I tend to think about it from a framework in economics. There's a rich literature called transaction cost economics, and it kind of looks at what types of industries and what has to be true about those industries for you not to need an agent. And typically, transactions that are very routine, that are very frequent, and are not very idiosyncratic. They're very and lower cost. Those will be things that you don't need an agent for. So you don't need an agent to go pick out your groceries because you do it a lot. You know a lot about groceries, and it's generally not a high value transaction. But buying homes, people do it every 7 to 10 years. It's probably the biggest thing the most expensive transaction they're going to make, and it can be very idiosyncratic. There's a lot that can go sideways in a transaction, and that's a perfect example for a type of transaction that is typically going to be agent-mediated.
Right.
And if you look over time, the number of people who sell their homes by themselves has really never varied. It's never been greater than 15% of all transactions and never been less than 10%. Agents seem to. I think agents will always have a place in this business.
One of the great parallels that I think you've alluded to in the past is the fact that obviously there's websites that are developed in order to be able to check out your symptoms and the drugs and the side effects that may be as a result of that. And certainly the intent was not to substitute a physician. It was a starting point to be able to provide information to the consumer. And I think there's parallels in that.
That's exactly right, yeah. And in the chapter, we actually reference WebMD as being kind of a model. I think a lot of people, initially when Zillow started, thought that, we're going to, the goal is to disintermediate agents entirely and kind of do more like what Expedia did with travel agents. But the reality is that it's a lot easier to book, people can reasonably book travel on their own because they understand it, they do it a lot. And it's not that high, and it's not that expensive. But real estate is a completely different value proposition. And the better analog is, as you just said, is like a WebMD, where WebMD allows people to understand a lot about medicine. But the idea that they're going to self-diagnose and even perform surgery is crazy. You're still going to go to a medical professional and say, hey, I'm better armed. I understand a bit more about what I have and possible treatments for it, but you're the expert. Help me navigate this.
Absolutely. Where do you predict would be the next thing, the next hip thing that one could look at to predict the appreciation of neighborhoods?
Well, that was in terms of the effect itself, which around neighborhoods, as we call them, is really we kind of chronicled various neighborhoods, places like the Castro in the Bay Area and Greenwich Village in New York, where we looked at just how cheap these areas were relative to surrounding real estate back in the 70s, and then how consistently, decade after decade, the growth potential was higher than the metro, such that now those areas are more expensive than the surrounding neighborhoods. And this pattern is played out in Atlanta and Chicago and other places. But as you say, you're right, that dynamic is winding down now because it worked. The reason it worked was because gay and lesbians were really consigned to the less desirable parts of the metro, and then they worked hard and invested and changed the dynamics of the neighborhood. But now that gay and lesbians are part of the social mainstream, they don't go live by themselves in a cloister. So that dynamic's kind of winding down.
Well, perhaps one can take a look at the neighborhoods around those particular hip neighborhoods. I don't know.
That's right, yeah. And we have a variety of chapters that kind of look at how to kind of spot the next up-and-coming places. And, we have a chapter kind of looking at predictors for gentrification. And then we have a chapter looking at what you just described, which was we ended up nicknaming the halo effect, which is, rather than move where the cool kids are, wait for the cool kids to come to you, which is, identify, a lot of people want to live in the premium neighborhood, and of course the premium neighborhood tends to be very expensive.
Right.
And the reality is that by the time most people can identify a premium neighborhood, a lot of the home value growth has already been exhausted there, and home values are high, but the growth curve is low. And it's a better move to actually look at areas that are adjacent to that neighborhood and buy there, and then those actually rise at a faster pace than the premium neighborhood itself.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know that we're dealing with a pretty hot market. I know that, Meri, you're saying that, there may be sort of seasonal spikes, et cetera. Based on the statistics, we're still, 20% over in terms of the number of sales year over year from last year. Inventory is at a historical low. I think everyone that we all talk to, I think we can all complain about the fact that there is just simply not enough inventory.
Right, and so the sales volumes are going down as well.
Exactly. So sales volume is down. Demand is up by the buyers as a result of low interest rates that Rick's talking about. So that is a recipe for multiple offer situations. So how do you manage your clients' expectations and emotions? Because we all know real estate is emotional. So if you have a buyer, how do you have them navigate through this? Because quite frankly, I don't know if I can handle it. If I was a buyer out there.
One of the things I like to do actually before when I get introduced to a client, whether it's a referral or through one of the sites that I pick them up from or advertisement, I like to personally meet my clients. I like to go through the whole search criteria. I tell them in your price range, there's definitely X amount of homes available, and I go through the MLS and I tell them there's 5 homes left, there's this many people. So I mentally prepare them that there will be a bidding war, and depending, again, it all depends on the area. So if it's in the inner city, obviously there's low inventory and more demand. If they're outside, like the outskirts of Boston, they have a pretty good chance of maybe getting it. So kind of filling them in, half an hour to 45-minute conversation definitely prepares them for not a recipe for disaster.
Sure.
So that's how I like, and it goes back to the hotels thing, that customer service has really helped me to develop. And
I think the biggest thing is not to let them get discouraged, because the market can be tough.
And when you address that up front, it makes it a lot easier when you get out actually in the street, putting offers in, and they're falling in love. And so you're almost trying to take a very emotional thing and turning it into not so emotional, and just sort of letting them know that you can't fall in love with it until we're walking to the closing table, or
it's very hard to do.
Past the home inspection.
Easier said than done.
I was just going to say that it's easier said than done.
Right.
Man. I tell you, I think people automatically, as human beings, we fall in love, and we all automatically say, okay, where am I going to put that couch, and where am I going to put that desk, and so on and so forth. And I think it's hard for them to yank it away and say somebody else won the bid.